All right, I thought I would explain I guess this is the right wing stance on. I guess I'm doing a right wing stance in 5 minutes now, after a 3 minute one. So I'm elaborating a little bit. I believe the most honest, hyper competent people should be selected from within our own group of people to run our people's lives with a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I'm less inclined to see the need for representation in leadership along sex or skin color other than mine. It's only fair they've got their own countries. No matter how unfair someone says it is, the dominant country did the right things to get into that position and the other didn't. And tying it to kin groups and nationalities and ethnicities is a literal bloodline connection to encouraging mutual well being. Their blood is your blood does better. If we operate along genetic lines, then we want to be teamed up with our own genetics. We don't want to fight our own genetics. We want to work with our own genetics in competition, hopefully not warfare necessarily, but in economic and cultural competition to build our people up, not fight against our people for the sake of foreigners or aliens or other kin groups. And it's solid. That's how society has built up ever since before we were even human. You look at that in chimpanzee tribes and stuff like that, and you see they have this system as well in a more primitive fashion and so on. So it's something that's evolutionarily stable in some sense. However, we can be aware of assimilation of foreigners, but we shouldn't act like it's the normal principle or process. Most people like to be part of what they grew up with on some level. Um, because, honestly, people self select based on their race most often into cultural groups. I don't know why they do it exactly, but that's what they tend to do. I don't know if it's a racial proclivity or if it's just an artifact of these people look like me and they do this. So I'm just going to assume that because they look like me, it's good for me because they're finding some success with it or something like that. I don't know if it's like it might be a combination of both, which is why it's so strong, but it's not entirely genetic either, and so on. And why it's so tough to like deal with that, and why people are so set in their ways. And you can divide civilizations and cultures up along roughly country lines. Um, and as for the argument of that the current world order's women in charge did the right things while the men didn't, that's because those Epstein politicians made it that way to undermine the civic body. Matriarchy is taking a settled civilization with prosperity and stability and making nomads out of them, as in homeless. It's literally the plot of Moana 2. There's no development, there's only the lowest common denominator. When society is run well, generally the people on the bottom can recognize the people at the top have skill they don't. But they don't mind because the people on top have organized things so that people on the bottom can solve their own problems freely, but with some degree of reward while doing what they can. And often that involves making other people in charge of smaller and smaller things, like a subsidiary thing, not one person taking more and more of all the power, until you get to the totally disabled who can't fix anything for themselves. And for that very small minority of people, then you have people taking care of them in a direct manner more so. It's even in the logic of the advice that you should never do anything for seniors that they can do themselves because it keeps them up to snuff in fixing their own problems for longer, even with the inevitable decline. So if someone's growing up, you want to encourage them to grow So you don't fix all the problems for them. You let them sort of muddle their way through it with a little bit of advice, a hint or something like that, so they can work on their own thinking skills, so that they can practice them, so that when it comes to problems that you're not around for or that you don't notice or something, they can fix it for themselves using the methods, the skills, in the sort of teach a man to fish, you feed him for life, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day kind of difference. And that's strong for getting people to get to their heights of glory and goodness and skills and potential. Then there's the middle part where they're hitting their top end of potential. And the way they get to the very top end is if you encourage their development when they're growing up. And then you find the decline after the peak. And like I said, the seniors thing, you're keeping them in the game longer at a competent level by letting them fix their own things that they can still, and only intervening on something they literally can't do, basically, you know. So the decline is slower. So you want a faster ascension a little bit. You want a peak that is higher than ever, and you want a slower decline than otherwise. And, you know, part of that is recognizing some people don't have a high peak and some people do. And you want the people who are the most honest at the top of the peak to be the ones in charge. And they will often rule with a slight touch that is very skillfully placed. It's sort of like the martial arts pressure points canard or thing. The myth of martial arts pressure points versus a good old punch. You know, but in the case of problem solving for a wide society, you can pressure point things relatively. You know, like if you know how to apply force, or you can apply enough force in a concentrated area, then you don't need to apply extra wasted force over a wider area to remove a problem. Like a scalpel versus a sledgehammer. The same amount of force behind them will do more damage with the scalpel towards the targeted thing than the sledgehammer. But the thing is, the scalpel also is more fine or focused, so you can avoid damaging the areas that aren't actually bad when you're doing a surgery to remove a malignant tumor or cancer or something like that. You know, a hammer just breaks your arm, whereas the scalpel removes the cancer tumor. Yeah, because without damaging a lot of the extra areas around it or whatever, so you can actually operate and skillfully heal someone instead of just breaking their bones. You know, it's kind of like the same principle in essence, and that's why it's so important. That's one of the reasons why people are talk about the I'd rather let 10 guilty people go free than one innocent be go into jail. And the answer to why people suddenly shift and say, no, we need a very strict government on the bad behavior, always looking for it and catching it as much as possible, is because the number of people doing bad behavior can be limited by taking certain problem people out of the equation. And those are like the hardened career criminals, typically speaking, who do like 50 crimes instead of just one over and over again, basically. That guy who stabs Irina Zarutska and so on, and those kinds of people, they go through the law system pretty often, and they're quite bad figures. You know, um, skillfully targeting the select few that are really bad can really improve things for a lot of people. Yeah. So, yeah. And because it's justice driven, it's a utilitarian argument in a way, because you're maximizing the public good with minimal suffering. So it's utilitarian in a sense, but it's also moral because it's also like, you do bad things, you get bad results for you. It's like selective enforcement in the sense of like picking the problem demographic for worse things and focusing on that instead of the wider demographic for mild things is like it satisfies both moral and utilitarian arguments. It works for both of them if you actually are honest about it. And the only question is if whether or not people can be honest about it. And the fact of the matter is, yes, there are people that can be honest about it. And they can often operate with a certain degree of limitation of their powers through cleverness. And that's what you're relying on. You're relying on skill and competency, not making it easier for the lowest common denominator of merit, the weakest merit, to ruin people's lives. Yeah. And when you are increasing the police force to deal with a problem population, you do in fact run into the problem of worse cops and so on. But if you're also similarly, if you're increasing the size of government, you're going to find more parasites and wasteful bureaucrats and control freaks in government, as opposed to principled servants of the public. Like it's necessary that you find weaker candidates because you have more positions to fill, and there's only so many decent people in society. So it can be difficult to select for them in a sense, which is why you want only a few people with more power than others, somewhat, and like a pyramid of power where it descends to the lowest common denominator as the it's almost like a diamond, not a pyramid, where like it's a I'm not sure how exactly the underside triangle should be, but the top end should be like a pyramid more or less, and then the diamond should like be upside down for the next part of it, where like the majority should be in the middle somewhere and like decently well off, and like the number of people who are worse off than average should be like a shrinking size of people. And the thing is, you can only really get that if you get competent, honest people. And there's no way around that fact. You cannot have a dishonest, incompetent leader and have a good system. Because the system is broken because the leader will inevitably twist it to his own low IQ or low bad morality ends, and the best of systems can only slow him down, basically. And eventually, you need to find people who are good at what they do and they're good as people on some level, at least in how they want to organize society. And I know you can compromise on the personal morality a little bit. I know Donald Trump has had some affairs and so on, and but at least all the Epstein girls and stuff that were interviewed basically said he was a okay guy, basically. That he wasn't preying on them or something like that, basically. So at least he's got that element. I know it's not exactly the highest bar, but at least it's a bar that we can say he didn't go lower than. And that's not something we can do with Biden or Carney or Starmer or anything like that. Um, so whether you like his harshness or his divisiveness in certain domains, the fact of the matter is a very basic personal morality plus a sense of responsibility for the well-being of his people and a self-sacrifice and a willingness to abide by limitations on his power and selective enforcement of limited resources skillfully and wisely towards maximizing limited resources um, effects is one of the best forms of civilization we can have, because the point is to allow people to fix their own problems as freely as possible with some reward and within their capacity and so on. And treating everyone like they're a poor baby who don't know no better, um, or treating lots of people like that who shouldn't be treated like that because it stunts their actual potential for development, um, you can see how this would be a reason for supporting someone like Trump, even with his personal moral failings and so on. Because it's about what he can do for people in general of his society. So yeah, I guess this is explaining the right-wing position in 17 minutes or 18 minutes, but yeah. Yeah, it's really that simple. That's what it comes down to for right-wing Christian capitalists. I know that some people don't like capitalism, like neoliberalism, and I get that because I don't like it either. But if you have a very Christian society with capitalism, then you get a sense of responsibility for the well-being of other people, both in the developmental process, but also, say, charity for the suffering and the poor and the homeless and the needy and so on. So what you get is, instead of the politics of envy and control freakery like the left or Islam or Hinduism or something like that, and the playing people against each other stuff, you get a united kin group of a nation, um, that also has a light touch on restrictions of other people for the most part, and tailors its limited resources so that it doesn't get super overbearing and tyrannical and so on, and control freakery. Um, to maximize human well-being and so on. And the reason why the other civilizations aren't doing so well is because they don't learn the lessons we learn. And the reason we're not doing good is because we turned our back on the lessons of Christianity and capitalism, more or less, um, as a civilization. So we've actually sabotaged our success, and the other civilizations sabotage their own success even more so. So it's not about unfair colonialism and we're just technology agents and so on. It's literally that we actually developed uh, the best, and because we developed the best, we have the strength, except that we turned our backs on it And the goal is to return to that tradition and maximize our well-being again, basically outside of leftism, Hinduism, Islam, communism, socialism, and so on, for the majority of our people. And it is a kin group, a bloodline, a lineage, a heritage, an ethnicity, a nationality, and so on. There's some talk, and I agree with it, about an ethnogenesis. So Black Americans are not Africans. Um, Irish Americans are not Irish. Italian Americans aren't Italian, and so on. But the thing is, they've been around for a while, right? Like at least 100 years, you know. And when they joined, they were quite similar to the first generation Americans from the from the Britain that settled the colonies and so on from the beginning, like the Mayflower and stuff like that, or the Founding Fathers era or something like that. They were highly similar to them, and they adopted the new customs and so on. And one of the things about North America, at least, because I know the Europeans talk about natives to Europe, and they don't want colonization. But the thing is, the Americas was colonized by the Europeans, and there's a few things that happen, which is we don't want it to happen to us, like it happened to the people before us, and also. Quite frankly, two wrongs don't make a right, and it's a matter of well, let's put it this way: it's a matter of there was enough problems the first time around for everyone, but also when the Europeans did it, the Aboriginals were not well civilized. Like, there's no way around it. They were mostly Stone Age or Copper Age or Iron Age or something like that at most. And we were in the travel around the world, um, metalworking, farming, animal husbandry, horses, uh, compasses, star charts, world maps, kind of awareness of technology, society, uh, the planets, land, and ocean. And like all these substantial things to civilization that make a civilization better. And part of that means that the Aboriginals were reasonably or very inefficient with the land while still having a good life. Like they didn't have the best lives ever. They had some very brutal lives with like a 40% homicide rate, similar to Vikings or the early medieval period Europeans, or Africa or something. The fact of the matter is, civilization is a good thing. And some civilizations are better developed and some are worse developed. And that means both technology and population density and safety and social dynamics and resource development and so on. And the Aboriginals have typically not used their land very well when they have it, and the Europeans typically do. So there was an added dimension of the pioneers and the frontiers and like settling the land in a very much more efficient manner while still also maximizing relative wealth and freedom with the pioneer spirit that made multiculturalism to an extent more viable than it does now after the ethnogenesis in long time settled lands with a high density civilization for 100, 200 years. Literally, there was like, I mean, this is just a I don't think it's necessarily true, but like there was a rumor or something that that North America only had 200,000 natives in the time that the Europeans came by. Now, I'm pretty sure it's probably more than that, but it's probably like the direction is correct. It's just not that extreme, I don't think. And what that means is you have like you have Europe, which is like a fifth of the size of North America or something, and it's got like 50 million people in it. And then you have North America with like 200,000 at 5 times the size of Europe. And it's like, okay, you can see the logic of more people within spaces as efficient. But you'll also notice that during the pioneer eras, when the population was rising because there was still land available widely, there was also the argument that you could do the efficiency thing while still maintaining very large spaces of domain for individual private families and so on, like a big farm or something like that. Um, that means that a lot of the and the thing is, the people had to work the land themselves. They couldn't rely on government handouts. So the two. So what that means is that there was a lot of free land for European civilization to colonize with minimal population density for them, but more population density for the Aboriginals, which was kind of, I want to say, forced in a way, where it was like inevitably going to happen because of the laws of powerful civilizations versus weak civilizations and so on, and like technological advancement and the advantages of technology over primitiveness. Uh, but it was a twofold thing. It was literally, you can advance to a technological level that you can be in a condensed area so effectively or efficiently that you can form a town or a city with like 1/10 of the land it would take under your own system, your previous system, and the city would have like 5 acres per homestead or something. You know what I mean? So there'd be like space, but there'd also be efficiency. And what we're learning with the population is, personally, even if I'm not a Malthusian, I do want there to be less people in my country a little bit. I don't want there to be 40 million people. I want there to be 30 million people or 35 million people of my own bloodline, basically. Um, of Canada. Um, but the thing is, with modern immigration, we're already a settled continent now. with an ethnogenesis, an ethnicity of our own, not native born, basically, over the centuries. And we, um, we, um, we're already at the maximum technology level that humanity has achieved. We're not Stone Age. So the argument that the other civilizations people can help us advance is very dubious. It's not very believable. Um, yeah, you look at our civilization 10, 15 years ago, and you look at everyone else's civilization 10, 15 years ago, or even today, and it's like there's miles of difference between us. And some people argue that it's just exploitation, but natural competition, natural selection, and competition of genes within a species says if you do the right things, you'll be better off, and your bloodline will be better off, not just you alone as a person. And it's just a matter of some people did the better things more, and some people did the worse things more. And one group got stronger, and the other group got weaker, or at least didn't grow in strength as fast, so it was relatively weaker. And the problem with bending over backwards to invite everyone in and sabotage our own kin group's success is it doesn't work in reverse, both because the other civilizations don't reciprocate our self-sacrifice, but also it doesn't work because if they copied us, they'd be worse off too. So whether you're looking at it from our perspective or their perspective, we owe it to ourselves to treat ourselves well and form what's good for us in our kin group, and then show how it's done to the rest of the world for them to copy what works for us as best as they can. And then they've got it just as good as us almost, or something. And just because we're ahead of them doesn't mean they can't follow us. We owe it to the world to be the leaders in well-being in the West, because we've got the best system and the most advanced social integration of the society, typically speaking, and we've just sort of overdone it a little bit, so it's not very advantageous for the majority population. If we return to the majority population doing better, and these other principles I mentioned, then it would be more palatable, eatable, or consumable to the rest of the world, because it would actually make sense directly, and they could copy it and do well instead of use us up. Which is what's currently going on. So by self-sacrificing so hard for everyone else that doesn't care about us as much, we're actually burning ourselves out and suffering unnecessarily and unhelpfully, and so on. So yeah, I'll leave it there, but that's my general gist.